This is the Middle-earth philosopher, where I talk about ideas, people, and relationships within Middle-earth and try to examine them from a philosophical point of view from the people who would have existed in that world. Today's video, I'm going to start with a short video clip that features a discussion between Eomer and his sister Eowyn almost before the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
To the smithy, go!
You should not encourage him.
You should not doubt him.
I do not doubt his heart, only the reach of his arm.
Why should Merry be left behind? He has as much cause to go to war as you. Why can he not fight for those he loves?
You know as little of war as that hobbit. When the fear takes him, and the blood, and the screams, and the horror of battle take hold, do you think he would stand and fight? He would flee, and he would be right to do so. War is the province of men, Eowyn.
Now, the reason that I chose to show this clip is because I am focusing today on the philosophical points of view of both characters, because I find it fascinating, and honestly, I really find that it was too bad this was not included in the theatrical version, because it would have given both characters, I feel, that much more depth to the situation and their points of view. Now, I have read some comments on this particular scene that Eomer was basically being a sexist dick, and based on his last bit of conversation there, it's easy to understand where that's coming from, and that it more or less makes out Eowyn to be the good guy, to be the hero, because basically Eomer is mansplaining to her why she shouldn't be fighting. But there's so much more going on here, and I'm going to kind of go into that. So let's start with the dick. Basically, what we have here is Eomer countering Eowyn, telling her why he has misgivings about Merry going into battle, as well as a less than subtle hint about Eowyn's participation as well that he slowly kind of figures out. And that scene alone is just beautiful, because that is a brother-sister type scene there, where only the two of them would know what the other one is actually thinking. He's just like, wait a minute, hold on. And that little bit I find was actually kind of funny. So Eomer's perspective here is that he is an experienced soldier. He's a veteran. He has been in actual war. He has seen wars. Unlike his sister and Merry, who have only fought skirmishes. And I feel kind of bad saying that, because they could have equally died in that skirmish as well. But if you want to compare the two experiences, yeah, Eomer does have a bit of an advantage there, I think. And what's important about this scene, and it's in contrast to the way Rohan's culture is presented in the movie, is that Eomer is not glorifying war. He doesn't actually find it that glorious to him. It's not some sort of fantasy dream, as his sister would like to think about it, and honestly, as I think many fans of Lord of the Rings tend to think about it as well. There's a harsh reality to conflict and war, and he points out that both Merry and Eowyn have false impressions about what is going to happen and what's going to go down when they engage Mordor at Pelennor Fields. And he goes into a pretty graphic, detailed explanation of what that's going to be. Now, again, in today's world, this would be considered mansplaining, because he is a guy telling a girl what she can and cannot do. And that it is explicitly an activity that is for men. Eomer says that flat out. So, yeah, on the surface, it is rather sexist. But the nuance here is that it's not necessarily coming from a sexist point of view, as women in general, as he is verbally saying. Rather, it's coming from a brother-sister point of view. He doesn't want his sister getting killed. He doesn't want his sister getting hurt, which is shown later on in the movie where he runs into her body on the field and he actually thinks he's dead. And you see just the complete and total agony and devastation that Eomer goes into when he sees this. This is exactly why he was telling her before the battle, don't go. Even though he doesn't say that, that was the motivation and intention behind it. In Eomer's view, conflict and war are something that goes above gender and equal rights. That when confronted with the truth of war and just how brutal and violent it actually is, that most people are going to run away. And in fact, Eomer does not fault him for that. When he says that Merry is going to run, he's not, digging into him. He doesn't feel that he's a coward for that. That's why he says he would be right to do so, because war is an awful thing. And that is a common element that Tolkien has in all of his writings, and that most of the adaptations show as well. And besides that, he has already shown that he's very protective of his sister when he almost beats the shit out of Wormtongue for stalking her. So it's not like this just came out of nowhere. Eomer is completely acting in character about who he is and what he is and how he feels and cares about family and how he shows that. Also, the role that this scene shows from Eomer's point of view and worldview is that it is reminding the audience about the horrors of ancient combat. Not combat in general, which is equally awful, but ancient combat where it was in your face and people are shitting themselves and you're trying to kill the other person mercilessly in any way and however it is possible to do that. And this is something that a lot of media, since media became a thing, and honestly even ancient plays and whatnot, tend to play down, is the actual level of violence that occurs during these engagements. So that even if a character feels that they're going to die, quote unquote, gloriously, it's going to be in a brutal fashion, in which we see in the actual Battle of Pelennor Fields, when we're watching Rohan's soldiers and horses get trampled and stabbed and just every imaginable thing happen to them because of the olifants employed by the Haradrim. A fact that's played up excellently by the movie when Rohan does their charge at Pelennor Fields. And now it's done to this sweeping music and these glorious wide shots of the Rohirrim riding down the orcs and everything. And you cannot help but get swept up in that and feel the quote-unquote glory of that. Unless, of course, you're an orc fan and we're an orc there. Not so glorious then, obviously. But either way, you get the point. It's played up as kind of the stereotypical Hollywood portrayal of war. And that is until the Haradrim show up. And at that point, it stops. And when the actual engagement between these two cavalry forces, because olifants were pretty much cavalry basically, just much bigger animals, when the engagement actually happens and the merge occurs, the music just stops. It just goes to complete dead silence. And all you hear is the screaming and deaths and the broken blades as the Rohirrim now are being ridden down by cavalry, which is ironic, but at the same time it was just beautifully and excellently done, showing this contrast. And this is exactly what Eomer is referring to when he's talking to Eowyn. It is that drop of silence that he's talking about when the fear takes hold. And I think that those two scenes put together, that of his discussion with Eowyn and the scene with the Haradrim, both show that Eomer wasn't being a sexist asshole. He was speaking as a soldier about the realities of war that don't care what gender you are or what your reasons are for going to war. War tends to be a equal level playing field for anyone daring to step onto that field. Once you're on there, it doesn't matter what you believe, what your rights are, or anything like that. You're fair game, no matter what. Now, having said that about Eomer, it does also show that he also underestimates his sister, in that they are both from the line of a stubborn warrior lineage after all. They're both very hard-headed people, and they're both kind of very violent people as well, and very bad-tempered. So I feel on the one hand that he shouldn't have been surprised that his sister was going to not listen to him. And what Eomer is missing is that though Eowyn is coming from a naive place and a naive view of war, that naive view is built upon a solid conviction, a solid dedication of purpose to the conflict that is motivated by a suicidal desire to die in battle because of her love that was rejected by Aragorn earlier on. But regardless, the conviction of a martyr basically is still there. And it's been said, if you ever look into the eyes of a martyr, it's a very terrifying thing, because you see that ungodly almost dedication to their cause, that they're willing to die and kill for that. And that's Eowyn at this point. This is exactly Eowyn at this point in time of who she is, and whether it's right or wrong or somewhere in between. Eomer also misses out that his sister is unhappy with the traditional role of a Rohan shield maiden. Even before Aragorn rejects her love, Eowyn wants to establish herself and be seen as an equal among the people of Rohan, and that she too comes from a line of kings and a line of warriors. She too is a warrior and wants to prove that, and is never, up until this point, given the chance to establish that. And this is where we're going to segue into Eowyn's point of view now. Now, Eowyn is not a badass during this movie because she's saying these really cool and independent lines, or that she decapitates a fell beast and kills the Witch King. Not at all. And if anything, calling her a badass kind of gives her a disservice, I think, to just how great her character is. Because she went into the battle with a naive view of what combat was actually about. But when confronted with that grim truth that she's looking at the army of orcs looking at her, we're ready to, kill them all, she was able to not only deal with it, settle on, okay, this is the price of what's going to be paid if I choose to do this, and does it anyway, but she also chooses to follow her convictions and enter into that world, fully accepting that, yeah, I was naive about what I saw about this, and I'm going to choose to go into it anyway. And I think this serves as a counter to some of the critics who feel that Eowyn had no agency because she did this after Aragorn's rejection of her, implying that if Aragorn had accepted her offer to stay with the army, or even perhaps if she could go with him, Legolas and Gimli, that Eowyn may have chosen otherwise. And I think this view is completely wrong, because even before she meets Aragorn, it's established that she is firm of mind, she's stubborn, she has a warrior's heart, naive though some of her views may have been. Eowyn already knows how to use the sword proficiently. Eowyn already knows the history of her people and the women of her people, that the harsh realities of the world of Middle-earth left women just as vulnerable to war as it did men. She's already fully aware of that. So the fact that this happens after Aragorn rejects her is not a sign of removal of agency. It's just a sign of, okay, I wanted this option, it's not going to be there, and my only other option right now is to go back to where I was before, stuck in this gilded cage, as she calls it, and she doesn't want that. She has tasted freedom, so to speak, in that Aragorn was the first person to recognize Eowyn for who she actually was, and she doesn't want to go back to not being seen anymore. It would be better to die. So her agency is, I'm going to go die in battle. Moreover, it also fleshes out the character's position and where she's coming from in her love for Aragorn, because this isn't a love that is based on coming from an independent woman to submitting to a man. Again, it's coming from the fact that Aragorn was the first person to see that which she already saw in herself, but her family and no one else did not. And it's no coincidence that she continually insists upon fighting openly and alongside that person who sees her as a fellow warrior even after this moment. And that's what she's talking about when she wants to join his company when they're about to lead the army. She's not going to go off and marry him and have kids and everything. She wants to go with them so that she can fight alongside them. And of course, this opportunity is denied her. Essentially, that Aragorn is the first glass of water that she may have had in a very, very long time. And once you have that first glass of water after a long period of thirst, you don't want to let that go or go back to that period of thirst where you weren't getting any water at all. Now, to Eomer's credit, he gets a hint of his sister's turmoil during that short pause before she walks off and he goes off into his mansplaining about war, and how he catches that non-verbal intention behind what she was saying. Eomer immediately, right there and then, gets his first indication of the true nature of his sister in the underlying hint that she's not talking about Mary at a certain point. She's talking about herself, because that's what he would do, I think. But there you are. But they've never seemed to have ever had a heart-to-heart. So this was his first indication that, oh, wait a minute, there's something else to my sister here that I didn't know about. And even Theoden suspects this ambition, which is why he keeps trying to check her several times. Again, I don't think Theoden is trying to be a sexist, know your role, know your place type of person when he keeps telling Eowyn not to fight. Again, he's trying to protect her, and more than that, he even makes her the first ruling queen of Rohan should he not come back, because he wasn't expecting to come back. And that alone should have said something to a lot of people, that he was making her a queen of Rohan. That's a big deal. That's not some sort of hand-me-down or any kind of thing like that. He's making her the first warrior queen of their culture. And that tells us and tells her, I think if she could see it, just how much trust he actually does have in her ability. It's just that from his point of view, that this was where it was more needed. But all that being said, all of these nuances and subtleties are missed because none of this means anything to Eowyn. She just sees being a queen as yet another gilded cage, not an actual place of power and authority. She would have no choices before her that she herself wanted, so that in her mind, it was still better to die than to die a slave, albeit a royal and pretty slave at that. And it's not that she holds any ill will against her family and knows what they're trying to do. It's just that while the families do know each other, at the same time, they don't. They don't entirely get where the other is coming from. Just hints and glimpses. And that probably might be a more tragic element to that family. And that's the importance of the clip that I showed at the beginning of this video. That it is the first exposure, really, of the siblings, of who they actually are underneath, yeah, you're my brother, you're my sister, I love you as my sibling and everything and all that. What the siblings know of each other highlights what they also don't know about each other, but at the same time, there's no malice in that portrayal, as it often accompanies such situations in other stories and shows and whatnot. It's a misunderstanding, essentially, that's finally brought to the surface by these extreme circumstances. And this is why I really wish this had been in the theaters, because it pays respect to both positions about not just who the characters are and the nature of their relationship, but also, I'm not going to go into depth on this, but just regarding women in war, period. Eomer is not being a sexist jerk, as many would like to make him out to be. And Eowyn is not being a quote-unquote Mary Sue either, and does have to confront that truth of what her brother tells her. It's not some sort of propaganda piece of bravely marching out and conquering all and saying, fuck you to the naysayers. Eowyn is brave and does prove her brother wrong, but she pays a price for it that was demanded by war itself and not some other male person. I think in a way you could almost argue that war is an entity in Middle-earth. That war itself is some sort of, I don't know, unembodied conscious being of some sort that wants tribute and sacrifice for anyone who wants to participate with it. But that's a whole other side note there, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But effectively, just as Eomer's philosophy served the role of showing the audience and reminding the audience of the nature, the true nature of war and battle, Eowyn's character in this particular scene and in this particular moment is a reminder that people can still confront their limitations and their false points of view and potentially overcome them, as Eowyn does. And that neither side is necessarily wrong or being prejudiced or any other label that we today would like to pin that on. And especially, I think that's important because with Rings of Power coming out now and having women in more better roles and, as they're saying, I guess, combat situations and everything, I think the example of this portrayal of Eowyn is very important. And they need to portray that as well. That is the heroism of Eowyn and her brother. That it is not men against women, but it is human beings against circumstance and striving to overcome those circumstances. And that's why this scene, I think, is so beautiful.